Welcome to my ranking of the Planet of the Apes films. I've been slowly trundling my way through these over the past few weeks. Some of them were first time watches, some of them I remember from my distant past. I'm going to be covering them all. So I'm going to be including the 5 films from the original run in the late 60s, early 70s, the Tim Burton remake from 2001, and the 3 reboot films that have come out from 2011 onwards. I'm not sure if those films are ended now, because if you go on Wikipedia, there's sort of mention of a possible 4th film. I don't know if it's been put back because of COVID or whether it's in development hell or whatever, but certainly there are no more films due for some considerable while. So this is a ranking which should remain up to date for the foreseeable future. Right, let's get into it. We've got 9 films to get through, starting, of course, with the one that I consider to be the weakest in this franchise. So straight away we have the Tim Burton remake from 2001, the one which is the most isolated from all the other films. I was hoping that this would turn out to be the On Her Majesty's Secret Service of this franchise, but no, it's quite the opposite. I almost went to see this when it first came out in 2001, and I think the reason why I didn't was because I had a really low budget at the time, being a student, and I'm glad I came to that decision, because if I'd have gone to see this with the little money I had back then, it would have really annoyed me. It's just really boring. It doesn't approach the Planet of the Apes world from an interesting angle. So it starts out with all these astronauts in a space station, and they're sending chimps in pods through this black hole because they're too scared to go through it themselves. We know, of course, that on the other side of this black hole is a Planet of the Apes. I can't even remember if the black hole takes them forward in time to Earth in the future, or whether it's a different planet entirely in this iteration. I only watched the film a couple of weeks ago. I can't remember already. It was so boring. The action sequences feel like costume action from the 80s. It's just not very well staged at all. I'm not the biggest Tim Burton fan anyway. I thought Alice in Wonderland was okay. The first Batman was pretty good. Don't like the second one. Edward Scissorhands was alright, I suppose, but looking at most of his work, I definitely wouldn't consider myself a fan. I bought this on DVD just for the purpose of this ranking. It was really cheap on eBay, like £2 or £3, but as soon as I'd finished watching it, it was straight in the bin. It was not going on my shelf. There's no way I'll watch this film again. So a very easy decision for me to put this one last in the ranking today. This is the 5th and final film of the original run, and on the negative side, it suffers from one of the biggest problems that Tim Burton's film suffers from, in that it's just got a complete absence of any kind of style in the action sequences or the battles. The last half an hour especially, it feels like I'm watching one of those historical reenactments that you might pay £10 to go and watch on a Sunday afternoon, but it's just actors pretending to hit each other, and at the end they'll all get up and you'll give them a round of applause. On the positive side, the story's pretty good. This feels like probably the first time in the franchise that humans and apes have been quite equal. At one point, they have to go to this radioactive city, and I thought the film was going to get really good at that point. Sadly, we don't spend too long in that place. We go back to where we were. The ending's quite satisfying, though. This feels like the natural end to a 5-film cycle. It's not like they leave it open for a 6th film, but because this film was bad, they never ended up making another one. This feels like the natural conclusion, and I was grateful for that. So I think in the future, if I ever come back to these films, I'm going to have a bit of a dilemma. Do I slog my way through what is still essentially a pretty poor film to get to quite a satisfying ending? Something for me to think about another day, but you absolutely do not want to watch this film in isolation. You can only come to this if you've watched the previous 4 and done so relatively recently before you come to this. So this is the 3rd film from the original run, and the first thing to say is the story is absolutely ridiculous. So you've got 2 apes who somehow managed to fix Taylor's spaceship, even though he himself had completely written it off. I mean, apes from this period would have had no knowledge about spaceships or how to fix them, but these 2 pull it off. So they then go into space, and instead of going straight back to the 1970s, they then apparently hang around in space just long enough to see the Earth blow up behind them, but the explosion, which presumably would have been bloody huge, doesn't take out their spaceship. it's just absolute bullshit with a capital B. But once the story gets going in the 1970s, it's quite an enjoyable drama for about an hour. It's fun watching the apes intermingle with 70s society. Of course, it's very predictable that eventually some shady government types are going to make life extremely hard for them. I watched this for the first time in the 90s and quite enjoyed it from first to last, but this second watch, 25 years or so later, I just found myself losing interest in the final half an hour. It just doesn't get my blood racing watching these two apes go onto an abandoned ship and try and survive. So, yeah, this is one that I never really need to come back to again. I only really watched it a second time for the purpose of this ranking. This is the fourth film of the original run, so straight away I'm going to give it some praise and say that it's better than the one that came out before it, and it's also better than the one which would follow it. So at this point of the storyline, humans have just started to take on apes as pets because all the dogs and cats have died of some strange disease. You've just got to go with it. But what I like about this film is that it's self-aware enough to know that as a setup this would look ridiculous in the normal world, even in the 1970s. So what they've tried to say is that at some point in the 60s or the 70s, Earth has gone off in this weird alternate universe to a kind of society that's like the one from The Running Man or Demolition Man. It's that kind of vibe, that kind of feel. There's even a plaza type place in this film which feels like it's straight out of The Running Man. They've clearly spent a lot of money on this film. There's lots and lots of extras. At times it feels like there's hundreds of apes in costumes in the one scene. There's lots of funny situations involving apes and their masters, lots of good humour. There's a great battle at the end, which feels very well choreographed. And again, it reminds me of The Running Man when Arnie and the rebels are taking out all the government soldiers. And I've got to say, there's a really good performance from an actor called, I think his name's Ricardo Montalban or something like that. I've probably got that completely wrong, but he was the guy who was the baddie in Star Trek II Wrath of Khan. I've never seen him in anything else until I watched this movie, and what amazed me is he's playing like completely the opposite sort of character from Khan. Really impressive, and I really felt for the guy because he really has to go through the ringer in this film. My estimations of him as an actor have really gone up. I just used to think of him as a random villain sneering his way at anything that Captain Kirk says to him over the radio, but he's really good in this, and this is probably the first pretty decent film on this ranking today, I'd say. So this is the first of the reboot trilogy, and it's the only one that my wife was interested in watching with me. I guess the main reason for that is that it's a different setup to the normal sort of Planet of the Apes film that you get. This idea of a scientist and his girlfriend raising an ape from a baby all the way into adulthood. But I think this is a better way to approach a reboot than what Tim Burton did. You know, all that stuff with apes in pods going through black holes. I'd still at some point like to see them remake the original film, but in a more interstellar way. But this approach is fine. It's got some incredible CGI. I mean, I saw this film when it first came out, so this was my second watch, and I had completely forgotten just how good the CGI was in these reboot films. It's seamless. I mean, it's like having real apes running around. And if this had been just one film and had no sequels, it still would work really well as just a one-off thing. And the final thing I want to say about this particular film is that it's got the guy who plays Draco Malfoy from Harry Potter in it. And it's like he's playing the exact same character. I mean, you know, in the Harry Potter films when he says stuff like, "Where are you going, Potter?" He says stuff like that, but to apes, but with the same sneer on his face. It's really funny. And now we have the second film in the reboot trilogy. It was very, very close between this one and Rise. And I think ultimately the reason why I've decided to go for this one just is because I love the post-apocalyptic world they've created for this. Getting to see cityscapes with bushes and weeds pushing up through them. It reminded me a lot of the Last of Us video game, and especially in the HD that I watched the film, it just looks incredible. Storyline wise, I'd probably give the edge to Rise, because what this film tries to do is make you sympathise for both sides, apes and humans. That didn't work quite so well to me because I just didn't feel that invested as to who was the victor in the end. But once the third act arrives and you get this incredible battle on this really tall tower, I was totally into this. I was really enjoying it. I like it when action films end on the tops of really high buildings and stuff, and there's a huge threat of characters falling to their deaths. For some reason, that just always really does it for me. So on the whole, this is a good sequel. It carries on the story really well. And in third place, we have the third film in the reboot trilogy. So these films get better as they go along, in my opinion. I could easily accept the argument that this is the best Apes film of them all. In fact, I'm going to predict that if I were to watch 100 people's Planet of the Apes ranking, this would come top more than any other film. The only reason why it hasn't in my ranking is that it just so happens there are two other films which I prefer, mainly because of nostalgia reasons. But yeah, this is an incredible end to the trilogy. I mean, the landscape in this film looks even more incredible than it did in the second film, mainly because it's all snowy this time. I guess it's meant to be winter. And from a story perspective, the writers force you to pick a side this time, which I think was a really smart decision. So we follow the apes. All the humans in this film are generally bad. The action is incredibly well choreographed. There's a subplot involving a young girl, which I think was a really good addition to the story. And there's so many twists and turns late on. It's edgy as seat stuff all the way through. Caesar as a character is better in this than he ever has been before. He is absolutely MVP in this. There's a moment with an avalanche which just had me off my seat almost. I was like, yes, that is incredible. And the actual ending that you get is really emotional. It wouldn't bother me if there wasn't another film in this particular run, because I just think it ends the story absolutely perfectly. So for my money, War for the Planet of the Apes, or is it War of the Planet of the Apes? Not sure, but it's an incredible film. It's really good. So now we've gone back to the original series. This was the second of the 5 film run from the late 60s, early 70s. Coming into this, I thought Beneath the Planet of the Apes might be the overall winner, because this made an incredible impact on me when I was a kid. I mean, I enjoyed the first film, but the second film blew me away at the time. I mean, it was like half horror film, half sci-fi, watching these characters go into this underground cave system, and they're seeing like abandoned train stations and stuff. It captured my imagination, and the ending as well. I mean, that was amazing. Depressing, but wow. I mean, so the Earth just blows up, the end, and you get to see all these characters just gunned down in the middle of scenes. That didn't normally happen at the end of most of the films that I watched in the 90s. So this film really struck a chord with me when I first saw it. I've always intended to go back to it. I didn't think that it would take me this long. I don't think it's the best film in this franchise anymore, for reasons I'll go into in a minute, but I still think it's a great sequel. About as good as they could have done, I think, given the fact that Charlton Heston didn't want to do a full role this time around. So I'm going for the original film as my favourite. It's got one of the most iconic endings to any film in the history of cinema. When I first watched it as a teenager, I did not know that that ending was coming. I spent the whole movie genuinely thinking that this was all taking place on a different planet. I guess if you twig what's going on with this film before the end, it will have less impact for you. But when I watched it, I had no clue what was coming. And when I saw that Statue of Liberty, I was like, whoa, that is astonishing. And then the following week, they showed Beneath the Planet of the Apes, and there was another incredible ending. But I love the adventure feel to this particular film, having these 4 astronauts crash land on what you think is a different planet, and then they have to go on this slow walk across a desolate landscape towards where the apes live. This film is brutal as well. It takes no prisoners. Well, I guess the apes technically take prisoners later on, but you knew what I meant. There's a woman amongst these astronauts, and she gets killed off before the rest of them even get off the ship. I mean, I just find that incredible from a creative standpoint. You wouldn't get that in a movie these days. There's no way they're killing off the woman first and right at the beginning. So I think if they were ever to do another Planet of the Apes film, I'd like them to attempt another go at this sort of approach to it. I think this is just a brilliant film. Charlton Heston puts in a great performance. The way that he slowly imposes himself over the ape society as the film goes on is really captivating to watch. I like the fact that some of the apes are good. They're thoughtful people. They're not just savages. And even the ending to the film before the big twist is it's just really well done. The scenes on the beach and the confrontation between Taylor and the mayor of the Ape Society. That's not his official title, but it's that sort of position that he's got. This is just a great film from start to finish, and it's my number one. So do let me know what your thoughts are on this franchise and how you would rank them if you've seen them all. And I will be back for another ranking very soon, I guess. Until next time, cheerio.